Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra comic review. This one's going to be my spoiler review for Legend of Korra Runes of the Empire Part 1. This book is out today, everywhere you can buy it digitally or in bookstores. Tomorrow is the comic book store release date for this as well, so this one should be very easy to get, and it seems to be the way they're doing most of the books nowadays. So here's our front cover. As you can see, a lot of excitement when this book was announced because there's Kuvira front and center on the book. On the back, also Kuvira in prison, of course, and yeah, so you already know my non-spoiler thoughts on the book. I got a review copy for this one, digital review copy, and I reviewed that a week or two ago. So now let's get into the spoilers here and go full details, not holding anything back at all. So yeah, I really like this book. To me, this is the Korra comic that they should have led with in a way, or was more like this one. I don't hate Turf Wars, but Turf Wars definitely, I think, was lacking in a lot of regards. I don't think the plot was all that great. I don't think the villain was all that great. They didn't even do a lot of, particularly interesting character dynamic stuff of just, you've got all these core characters to do stuff with, and they didn't really do all that much. Like Mako and Bolin didn't really interact all that much with like Korra and Asami. And so with Turf Wars, I felt like the really only takeaways were that, okay, Zhu Li is the president now, and you've at least done some development on Korra and Asami's relationship, and that's kind of about it. Here, it feels so much better because you have Team Avatar interacting a whole lot more. You have the benefits now that Zhu Li is president and we're actually trying to do stuff. This is where they start to incorporate Prince Wu and bringing democracy to the Earth Kingdom into play with the elections starting, and then most importantly of all, addressing Kuvira with her upcoming trial, and then the need to utilize her in handling the remnants of the Earth Empire, which are now being led by Commander Guan. So, and that's basically where we start. The book actually starts off with the introduction of Commander Guan. So you can see here he is, as well as Dr. Shang. And the setup for him is that, like, what's the best way to describe his character? Because I do think he is actually interesting. He seems to be in control of this particular section of the Earth Empire army that Kuvira didn't have a lot of hopes for. Early on in the book, he talks about how, when these soldiers came to us, they were pathetic, a disgrace to the uniform. And then Dr. Shang says, even Kuvira had little hope they could be redeemed. But you showed me that with every broken shell lies a seed waiting to grow anew. Thanks to us, these men and women are now a force to be reckoned with, and their potential has yet to be fulfilled. So they took kind of the weaker soldiers in the Earth Empire army and turned them into a pretty notable force to be dealt with. And throughout the book, they get across the idea that he has a small-ish army. It's a small army. It's nothing that's going to be a huge threat to the world. But just what he's willing to do is the big thing with Commander Guan. That Kuvira notes that he's like really, really ambitious, and basically that the experimental stuff that the Earth Empire was doing, he kind of pushes it all that more than anyone else. So I find that to be just overall very, very, very interesting. And Kuvira actually says about him, Guan is a cunning strategist with a keen mind. I put him in charge of my southern forces because I knew he could keep that region in line. If Guan hasn't surrendered by now, that means he's plotting something. I'd treat him like a barrel of blasting jelly with a very short fuse. And the idea here is that, basically where Kuvira really comes into play is that they begin to figure out that the Earth Empire hasn't completely surrendered. Guan is running the remnants, and they have to deal with him somehow because the elections are coming up really, really shortly. So, of course, they go to Kuvira to at least get a sense of who is he, what's he like, and she decides that Kuvira basically thinks the best way to deal with him is if I speak to him, and I can potentially get him to back down, and that's why you see sort of Kuvira sort of not just imprisoned or in a sort of trial setting. But what I like about it is that the strategy that he ultimately has is that he wants to bring the Earth Empire back. He thinks Kuvira is a traitor for what she did. He obviously doesn't have the context of why she surrendered, but he is full on with the Earth Empire and is almost more devoted than she ever was. But the way he's going to do it is not with his military force. He knows he has to go by things in a more subtle way than perhaps Kuvira did, because he doesn't have the forces to do what she did. So he utilizes the fact that Wu is making these elections in all the different states, and he's starting with Gao Ling. That's the big kind of world thing that's going on. The first state that is going to hold elections to start it all off, with all of the Earth Kingdom holding these elections, is Gao Ling, and that's obviously Toph's hometown. That's where she's from, and that's the first place that is going to have elections. So the big thing by the end of the book, the sort of twist, is that Kuvira goes they bring Kuvira to speak to Guan. He refuses to surrender. He just, dismisses Kuvira, in surrendering, you basically have lost any sort of, trust I had in you. Why should I listen to what you have to say? I'm going ahead with this. They have to stop Kuvira from getting overly angry and fighting him. And then in the aftermath of this, he just says to Korra, like, you actually can't stop me because I've done all the paperwork. I'm a candidate in Gao Ling for the election. And that's the sort of, twist in all of this, that he is going to do things the right way. And it says, it even says, technically there's nothing stopping him. It's an open election and his documents seem to be in order. So that's very, very interesting. So he wants to become he's officially declaring his candidacy for governor of Gao Ling. So that's very interesting in that immediately they can't just stop him with force, because as much as they sort of know he's doing something bad, he is going about things the legal way. And suddenly this is the villain using the big positive thing a lot of the good characters have been doing to obviously try and fix the Earth Kingdom. He's using that against them. And the big thing about the reason why Guan is such a cunning strategist and why he sort of has a bit volatile is because the experiments that are talked about at the start of the book, as we saw from the preview, let me just get those. You said you're getting better responses from the subjects. That's right. Continue your experiments. So that's very, very interesting. And again, this is all in a re-education camp in Gao Ling. And that they've been making better progress. So this gives you a sense of the re-education. We're now sort of learning what it is, or at least what it was going to become, with this sort of new technology, this new process that Dr. Shang and Guan have been running. The last page cliffhanger ending to the book is the fact that they're basically brainwashing people so that they'll vote for Commander Guan. And so we get this bit right at the end. It's very Lake Laogai-esque, but obviously more with technology as opposed to the kind of weird techniques the Dai Li were using. But you can see there, a vote for Commander Guan is a vote for progress and prosperity. Go with Guan. So that's his kind of campaign slogan. The alliteration on the G there, go with Guan. And he's just getting people in there, re-educating them so that the one thing that they'll know is that when the vote comes around, vote for him. And it's interesting because they set up earlier on in the book that Wu isn't particularly happy with the way the election is sort of panning out so far, in that the two guys that are already up for election, Chief Magistrates Ling and Bok, are just the two of the most boring candidates ever. Like, look at the two of them. They look almost identical. Both Wu and Korra talk about how, if this is the way it's going to be, like, are we actually going to change anything? Because these are all just guys who are part of, like, the bureaucracy of the previous, the way the Earth Kingdom was ruled. And will anything change if every state just elects the sort of politician guy that they had there in the first place? He was hoping that the candidates would have a little bit more vim and vigor. That's what Wu says. That they were bringing some new political blood to keep it alive. So that's just a really kind of fun little thing of just like, oh yeah, the kind of boring side of politics of just like, if people have no reason to vote for anyone of note, like of course Guan's going to probably get votes anyway just because he stands out more than the other two, and he's sort of rigging the vote by brainwashing people. They have a tough task against them, and so very quickly, like right at the end of the book, they decide that the only way that they can really stop this is that they have to get someone who's popular enough to win, because they won't be able to, just they won't be able to help the other candidates win, basically, is the idea. They're just so boring. And then Korra comes up with the idea of like, Toph. That's the candidate. That's who we're going to run against Guan. We'll get Toph. She's a legend. Everyone knows her. Plus, Gaoling is her hometown, and I know for a fact that she hates the Earth Empire. And she would definitely bring a unique governing style to the Earth Kingdom. Bolin brings up that, the last time I saw Toph, she didn't seem too involved in getting, involved in world affairs. And Korra's just like, we'll just have to convince her. It'll be fine. And that's an interesting one because the part 2 description, there was a little bit of discussion when it came out that like Su Yin and Toph were both on the cover with some other characters, of course. But it was like, which one of them? And everyone would lean towards Su because it sort of fits her story and everything that's going on there. But like, Toph sort of was on the table, but I think what changes it is that we didn't actually know that Gao Ling was really going to be a factor in this book. That was sort of a new thing that really came out once the, bigger preview pages came out and so on. So I think that definitely changes things, in that like, okay, that's going to be interesting. One, we're going to get to see Toph again. That's very interesting. But how are they going to convince her? Because Toph is a very different person now than, especially the way she is in, like, say, Imbalance, the comic that came out last week. Like, it's night and day between older Toph and that Toph. In that Toph, the older Toph is more spiritual. She enjoys being in the swamp, away from people, and doesn't particularly like getting involved in things. So this is going to be a tough sell. But I suppose if they do kind of get across the idea that, like, the Earth Empire is trying to go about things again, and Toph did step in at least in a little bit, right at the end of the series, against Kuvira. But I think what's going to be interesting here is that, like, of course, Su and Kuvira is the dynamic that I think everyone wants to see from this book. Toph and Kuvira could be another interesting one as well, just because I think Toph could actually give Kuvira some interesting advice, because there should be some respect there, because Toph naturally respects people who are strong earthbenders, and especially strong metalbenders, and Kuvira fits that bill exactly. Kuvira is one of those top tier fighters on the earthbender side of things, so there should be a level of respect there, even if maybe Toph doesn't like what she did to her family in obviously the last season. But that could be interesting dynamic to see what that approach is, really, if anything changes, if Toph is potentially someone to help Kuvira find where she's going next in the comics. That's going to be very interesting to see just what ends up having to convince her. I do think that, like, especially if they find out about the brainwashing thing, that would be something that would absolutely convince Toph to jump in. Maybe it is just a tease for now. Maybe they think it's Toph that is the person, but maybe Su Yin would come in. But I suppose the other factor in all of this is, like, is Zhao Fu going to be involved in these elections? Like, is Zhao Fu going to also hold democratic elections? And if so, Su would probably want to run for her own place, or, like, is she for or against that? Which could actually be an interesting dynamic. Like, does Su technically have to give up the fact that she's leader there? I get that they already had a kind of unique leadership style there, in that I don't think Su was ever really gotten across as, like, the super heavy formal leader. It was more that, like, most people just looked up to her as, like, their family, like, founded the place, so she sort of has a leadership position. But so I suppose the question is, like, is Su even eligible to run somewhere else? Like, they say it's open election, so anyone can run, but can someone run in every state? Because I think the bigger question with Guan and Ruins of the Empire in general is, is it going to be just Gao Ling focused? Is Gao Ling going to basically tell the story of the entire election? Or is it going to be a thing where, like, if Guan wins, is he then going to try and do the same thing? Like, maybe he's taking advantage of some poorly constructed rules here, and he's going to be like, oh yeah, and I'm going to run in Omashu and Ba Sing Se and all these other places in the Earth Kingdom. I'm going to run as governor for everywhere. And he's going to win all of them if he goes unchecked. That, or he's going to get potentially like brainwash other people in the Earth Empire and use them as the candidate to be in other places. I'm wondering, is his plan bigger than just Gao Ling? Because in the end, like, what can he really accomplish if he is just democratically elected as just the leader of Gao Ling? And so on. Maybe there's something about the fact that because they're holding the elections not at the exact same times, it's going to be like one by one, that like if he's elected first, he sort of has a certain level of power because he's the governor of the first state and nowhere else at the moment is going to have some leadership. But that's I suppose the deeper stuff that they'll get into as we go forward and get into more of the details about what exactly is going on. But I think for the most part that covers the sort of political thing. As for, I suppose, Wu just as a character, I've said it before, but that like in book 4, my approach has always been that like I found Wu a bit too annoying early on, and they maybe spent a little bit too much time in the early episodes of just him being him. But once they got into the development towards the end of book 4, I found him to be a lot more likable as a character. And I think that continues here, where it's still Wu, where he has that development in that he's much more sensible. He is actually a solid leader, even if you can tell he doesn't quite have the experience. But there's still that slight goofy side that comes out. So he gives his speech basically to Republic City, I think it is, where they are. About how the elections are going to work. And he gives a very good speech. Everyone's impressed by it. You know, Korra says he's doing great. Mako's like, better than I expected. He almost looks like a real leader up there. Wu says, good morning, everyone. As you all know, a couple of months ago I declared my intention to step down as Earth King and abolish the monarchy. Well, after much planning and many discussions with the leaders of the Earth Kingdom states, that time is almost upon us. And you see Grandma Yin in the crowd just being like, boo, long live the monarchy. And she's told to calm down. You probably should behave yourself. I'm pleased to announce that the very first democratic election will take place 2 weeks from today in the state of Gao Ling. After the vote in Gao Ling, elections will continue in the other states within a year. The Earth Kingdom will have completed its transition to democracy. And he goes, any questions? And suddenly he's bombarded by questions, and that's sort of when he panics. He doesn't know which question to answer first. He doesn't necessarily have the answers. He struggles to act on the spot. So he bursts into song to basically get out of it. He's like, I find your questions absurd, and it's all done like as if he's like singing, as you can see there. So he just starts to sing, you know, I've given everyone my word, I'm going to step down and throw away my crown. And of course, Grandma catches the hat and is like, you'll always be my king. So nice references there. Julie, President Julie, steps in to kind of save him. I think what the king is trying to express through the medium of song is that once the other states see Gao Ling a smooth transition to democracy, they'll be encouraged and follow suit. So, you know, Julie, very, very competent leader, and I suppose I'll discuss that now before we get into the Kuvira and Team Avatar stuff. Again, like I think just not having Raiko in charge of things smooths out the sort of transition in terms of like allowing things to happen. Raiko was always this roadblock towards Korra doing anything in Legend of Korra. Now that Julie is in charge, she's much more competent, she's a nicer character, so just dealing with her is just so much, you know, better. And because she, I suppose, is close to, you know, Team Avatar and so on, there's that sense of like she has a respect for Korra, and so will listen to what Korra has to say. You know, it's not just that she's agreeing with her on everything, but she gives it thought, and if it's in any way reasonable, she'll be okay with it. And the big thing throughout this book really is, you know, that, you know, she includes them in the discussions. Like, Team Avatar is there in her office with Wu as they're like discussing these different things of like when Wu reveals to them like, actually, I want you to be there in Gaoling because we found out that there are remnants of the Earth Empire led by Guan. So that's what we need to do, and they all decide that we'll do this. And Julie is like, yes, that's perfectly fine. She lets Bolin, who's now her assistant, go with them. And, you know, that's really solid. When Korra goes to see Kuvira, again, I'll talk about that stuff just in a second. What happens is that she obviously has to convince everyone then that, like, actually, yeah, bringing Kuvira with us to talk to Guan, because Kuvira does want all of the Earth Empire to step down, could actually help us out. Because if he in any way ever looked up to her as the leader, he might still listen to her now, even after the surrender. So, you know, in the sauna, the steam bath, basically, they have this kind of conversation, and Korra's like, you might not like this, but I think we need to bring Kuvira with us, and she convinces them in a pretty nice way. And I think the main thing here is just that Korra manages to tell them well enough, and this is a good example of like Korra's growth as a character, because like in earlier seasons she might not have been able to explain well enough why this is actually a good idea. Now she's able to do that, and the result is that, you know, Julie is just like, okay, all right, I'll sign an order for Kuvira's temporary release, and it's all going very well, and she lets Team Avatar sort of handle this situation, because she of course can't go to the Earth Kingdom. She has to deal with things in Republic City, and it's just very solid. There's not tons of pages with her, but she just slots in very effortlessly as president. And there's a fun couple of moments with like Varric early on, because Bolin's now her assistant, like I said, and there's stuff like Varric being like, what's the soonest I can get a dinner date on the books with my beautiful wife? And Bolin's like, let's see, I don't have anything available until the end of the month. Sorry, she's got a lot on her plate. And he's like, who knew being president would be so much work? I'm pretty sure Zhu Li knew. And there's a fun little moment. That's really all there is with Varric. But, you know, overall, I think that a lot of the character stuff just really flows a lot better in this book. Just with the dynamics that are going on here. No one feels overly separated from each other and so on. So it works out pretty nice. So, yeah, I guess we'll get into Kuvira now, and then discuss, I suppose, everyone's reaction to Kuvira. So, the first time we really get to see Kuvira is that you get this kind of shot, which is the back cover here of Kuvira in her cell. So that's the back cover shot. And it's basically just getting across, the Great Uniter's reign may be over, but the Earth Empire will never die. And I suppose it's really just the kind of constant thing throughout the book of like, is Kuvira in any way planning anything? And ultimately, throughout this book, I think she's not, but she is at conflict within herself about what she needs to do, I suppose, at this point. She's trying to redeem herself in some way, but also hasn't taken responsibility for other things. And that's why she's so interesting to talk about in this book, because you don't really know what way to take her. And this book and what they talk about with Kuvira really makes you kind of question, in a way, like what you knew about her already, especially the stuff about like, oh, like you were an orphan, you know, your parents like abandoned you and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, this book kind of calls that into question, and is like, whoa, we're being very sympathetic towards Kuvira here, but what this book is telling us is that potentially not, and maybe a lot of it is more on Kuvira herself, and she's always been like this, and has kind of held herself back from people. And yeah, the first big scene with Kuvira is the one that we've seen already. It's the scene that they announced the book with. They showed us preview pages very early on. It is the trial sequence here. So it's I suppose just the very start of it, of just her pleading effectively. And it's interesting. Again, I'll read out some of it here. I yielded to the Avatar. I gave up my empire. I surrendered my freedom. The people I once considered family hate me, but that isn't enough for them. Now those in power want to humiliate me. And she's giving this sort of narration as they kind of tell her, this is what you were accused of. And I think it's interesting to note all this stuff. You stand accused of crimes against peace. During your reign as the leader of the Earth Empire, your transgressions included refusing to turn over emergency powers granted to you by former President Raiko and King Wu, numerous wars of aggression throughout the Earth Kingdom states, presiding over inhumane prison camps, invading the United Republic, a sovereign nation, and the use of spirit energy as a weapon of mass destruction. How do you plead? And ultimately, we know she pleads not guilty. But the reason why she pleads not guilty, I think, is interesting. And it gives you an insight into this is the kind of problem with Kuvira in this book. Is that what she says here, I both understand, but you also get why the other characters are frustrated that she says it. She says, how do you plead? I'm sorry for the harm I caused to the people of the Earth Kingdom and this city, I truly am. But this tribunal seems all too eager to list my offences without giving any considerations to my achievements. After the fall of the Earth Queen, the kingdom fell into chaos, and no one was willing to step up, I brought it back in order. I dragged an ancient culture out of the Dark Ages and modernized it. Everything I did for the greater good of the Earth Kingdom and its citizens. How do you plead? Not guilty. And in the aftermath of this, I think the most telling thing is Sue. Sue's reaction here is the most telling, because she's upset with Kuvira just doing this in the first place. Their feud is the interesting dynamic. Not guilty, the whole world knows what you did, Kuvira. What are you trying to prove? Don't turn your back on me. Kuvira says, I know I hurt you and your family, but you all turned your backs on me long before the Earth Empire ever existed. That is a lie. I gave you a home, I provided for you. But I was never really part of your family, was I? You attacked Zhaofu, you almost killed my son, and have apologized numerous times. When will you see through all of your anger to forgive me? That's what you don't get. Being sorry isn't enough. You need to take responsibility for what you've done. Goodbye, Kuvira. And you can tell that this gets to Kuvira. Kuvira can't kind of look Su Yin in the eye when she says all of this. And I think the telling thing is like that she feels that her just saying sorry is enough. And the fact that she can't just accept the punishment and has to note that, like, but what about all the good I did? Yeah, I was, like, basically racist to all the other nations and put them in prison camps and fired spirit weapons at people, did all this damage, invaded all these places, but, what about the good I did? It's like, yes, she did that, and I think it is important, and for Kuvira as a character, it's important for her to not just, I suppose, let herself just give everything up and just be like, yeah, I'll accept anything regardless of what happens. Whereas she wants the full context to come out. And I suppose, effectively, she's just basically saying, I want the trial to discuss all of this. I want all the evidence to come out and it just be like, yeah, okay, I'll accept all the negatives that I did, but I also want the positives in that, like, the reason elections are happening is kind of because of me. Ultimately, that, like, we're in this situation where the Earth Kingdom is stable enough to even hold these elections is ultimately because I stepped in to stop what was happening. It's I think, very interesting just to kind of even consider that. So the result of all of this, once they find out about Guan, is that Korra goes to see Kuvira. And you can see that here on this page. She arrives here at the place. Obviously, it's the same place that Zahir is being held. No, we do not see Zahir, but I think the idea is that he's basically just being held in one of the other cells. So she goes in, she's let in. And in, I think, what is probably the two most thought-provoking pages of the book, we cut to Kuvira here. You can see her eyes there. She's sort of thinking things over, and we get 2 pages of flashback to her childhood as she wakes up, as she opens her eyes as Korra arrives. And what happens here, obviously, and I think the context that's important to have here is what was just said to her. The last thing that we saw on the comic on panel was Kuvira being told basically by Sue, you refuse to take responsibility for everything. What's the exact words? That's what you don't get. Being sorry isn't enough. You need to take responsibility for what you've done. And she's thinking about this situation, and this situation in the past as a kid. It's interesting how similar it is to what's happening to her in present. So what the questions that I have about this are ultimately, are these her parents, or is this some sort of orphanage adoption type thing? I get the impression it's her actual parents, just because Kuvira, of course, has the sort of like beauty mark thing on her, just under one of her eyes, and her mother, or the person who is her mother, also has a beauty mark. It's a bit lower down, but like a similar one. So it's kind of tough to know exactly, but given that we know that like she did have parents, and from her perspective she was abandoned by them and so on, that she had to be taken in by Sue. So what happens here is we get this thing. We know you broke the vase, Kuvira. Admit it. And Kuvira says, no, I didn't do anything. She's shouting this. And she says, I want my toys. You'll get them back when you start behaving. And her parents are taking the toys away. They kind of put her in her room, seemingly locking the door, and say, let me out. And they say, it's for your own good. And Kuvira says, I'll show you. And she earthbends the wall down and then runs away, as her parents say, Kuvira, get back here. And she says, make me. And the question here, obviously, is that like we don't know if she did or did not break that vase. But the problem is that it's once again like, if she did, let's assume that she did, and that they're going for the comparison between what's happening to her now and in the past. She did something bad in the past. She broke this, even if it was an accident. They just want her to admit it. They might not even punish her if she admits that she did it. They may be punishing her for just lying. Now, it's interesting, like, you'll get them back when you start behaving, maybe giving the sense that, like, she's done this before, she's known for, like, sort of misbehaving in the past. The idea is that, has her entire life been her not taking responsibility for her actions? If she's done something that other people consider wrong, she will always try and deflect blame or something like that, or just run away from it. And borderline, like, are they saying here that she ran away from her parents? Like her parents didn't potentially abandon her. She just ran away from them, or else was so rebellious that they left her. And the whole idea that is questioning is that, like, I suppose her tragic backstory that we thought from book 4, is it actually more on her than other people, is the big thing. And then you sort of then talk about all of the other situations throughout this book of, like, when anytime Kuvira mentions her experience living with Sue, she always talks about how I was never truly part of your family. And all the characters who kind of know her are like, it's because you didn't, like, open up, you didn't, like, give us a chance to kind of do that. And she's blaming it on them, and they're blaming it on her. It's interesting because, like, there's so many ways to interpret just these 2 pages, and that, like, Kuvira's thinking about this, I think, because it is this exact situation. Now, how important is this? Is this just a minor moment or what? But they're very carefully, I think, doing something here in that, you know, I suppose the real question is, like, in the present day, is she now going to run away from those responsibilities here? She didn't stay in this situation to take punishment for the vase. Is she now going to try and fix things and somehow make amends for what she's done? Or is she, as she goes forward, going to try and escape the punishment? And I think that's the dynamic going forward that you're trying to think about. Of basically, is Kuvira going to try and escape and turn things around and get away from the punishment? Or is she going to stick around and try and help and then accept her punishment? But, you know, very, very interesting. Then we get Kuvira talking to Korra in prison, of course, or the other way around, Korra talking to Kuvira in prison. And Kuvira says, I had a feeling you were going to be my first visitor. And obviously Korra asks for help about Commander Guan. This is where Korra reveals, were you aware that he and his troops never surrendered? And I already read out the dialogue before about her giving her thoughts on Guan, and that he's got a very short fuse. And Korra asks her, if you were in my position, how would you deal with him? And she says, I'd take someone with me who Guan respects, someone who can reason with him and bring him in line. Korra's like, you want me to bring you? Guan's not going to roll over just because the Avatar asked him to, but if I meet with him face to face, I can guarantee I could convince him to concede defeat. Then you and King Wu can carry on with your little election. Korra says, thanks for the information, but I can handle Guan without you. Kuvira says, think it over, I'll be here when you need me. And you will. And what's interesting about this is that, again, at the end of book 4, one thing I thought they did that was fairly well was getting across some of the similarities between Korra and Kuvira. They're not identical or anything like that, but there are some similarities between them. And because of that, Korra is the character who is the most, I suppose, willing to give Kuvira a second chance. And so next time we see Korra, it's that scene in the kind of the sauna, basically, where she's convincing them to do this. So she's like, you all might want to relax before I tell you what I'm thinking. And it's like, you want to bring Kuvira with us, yes. And what's interesting here is that she says that she's our best chance to get the holdouts to surrender. So I'm thinking, what if we brought Kuvira with us? And she says, I wasn't crazy about the idea first either. And I'm not saying Kuvira will be a part of our team, but with her help, we can avoid another all-out battle and put an end to the Earth Empire once and for all. Everyone obviously gives their grievances, which I'll talk about more of the other characters' interactions with Kuvira a little later on. Korra says, I know, to everyone's grievances with her. Kuvira has hurt us all terribly, but before she was our enemy, Kuvira was our ally. She was the captain of Sue's guard and helped us to fight Zahir and the Red Lotus. And there's part of me that still feels like I still owe her for saving my father's life at Lahima's Peak. When I visited her in prison, I could see that she's still broken. I think she really wants to redeem herself in the eyes of the world and her people. I say we give her that chance. And so ultimately Korra manages to convince everyone that this is a good idea. So that's where we get the them actually, temporarily sort of releasing Kuvira, I suppose, into Korra's custody, basically, under Julie's orders. And then after that, like, it's an interesting dynamic because, they have Kuvira just like sitting down, like she obviously is wearing like handcuffs and so on. You can see it there, and she's being very, very polite and so on. She's just like, nice to see you too, gentlemen, talking to Mako and Bolin. And again, it's this idea of she doesn't immediately lead to anyone with like an apology or anything like that. It's just, I'm here. And she immediately is like, I want to be in something more presentable to talk to him. And, they ultimately agree that, like, yes, it would look terrible if we brought Kuvira in chains to talk to Guan and try and convince him to surrender. Of course, they have to be seen to have Kuvira free so that she has any sense of power over things. So they agree to do that. And so that's when we get to her, initially, like, before that, she obviously gets changed, and that's where we have Kuvira in this outfit that I think was people saw on the preview pages and were like talking a lot about. But the dialogue's interesting as well. She talks about how, I'm not playing any games. I'm generally impressed by the loyalty all three of you have to Korra and each other. I never had that in my life. And Bolin says, that's because you always push people away. What do you know about it, Bolin? Opal told me that when you two were growing up, she always tried to be your friend, but you didn't want anything to do with her. Don't believe everything your girlfriend tells you. Opal and I may have lived under the same roof, but we had very different experiences being raised by Sue. You and everyone else have me pegged wrong. I'm not the same person I was when I was leading the Earth Empire. I've changed. And Asami is the one to say, I believe that people can redeem themselves, but no one changes overnight. And again, I think the question is, we don't know what Sue was like as a mother, for the most part, to her own children, and especially we don't know what her dynamic was with Kuvira. Kuvira thinks it was obviously very different, but the others are just kind of like, we tried, like, we wanted to be friends and close with Kuvira, even if they, confirming here, they lived under the same roof. Like, it's not some sort of situation where Sue just like supplied money and food and stuff like that to Kuvira and she lived somewhere else. No, they lived under the same roof. That's confirmed here. But it's clear that Kuvira didn't feel something, or, as we maybe suspect from some of the other things, was unwilling to open herself up to people, potentially because of past experiences or not, but for whatever reason, she's never had the loyalty of people like, say, Korra has had. And that's, I think, very interesting to talk about. They haven't revealed enough just yet to I think, properly go into full detail on what exact way to interpret it and what way to take it yet, but that's what I think part 2 and 3 are going to do. And so in that sense, this is an excellent part 1 because it gets you thinking about all the different dynamics with Kuvira. It doesn't reveal all of them just yet, but gives you just enough in a part 1 to get you thinking about every little bit in detail. From there, we move on to, I suppose, the last scene with Kuvira, which is Kuvira talking to Commander Guan to get him to stand down. So we get the line here. If you must know, it was actually my idea to come. I wanted to handle the situation personally out of respect to you and everyone who served the Earth Empire with honor. Guan says, don't talk to me about honor. You disgraced the Empire by giving up the fight in Republic City. And Kuvira says, no one regrets the demise of the Earth Empire as much as I do. I'm proud of all our achievements and everything we did to modernize the kingdom. People will be enjoying the benefits of what we did for years to come, but we can't allow our personal feelings to obscure reality. Our great experiment has come to an end. And Guan says, no, it's only the beginning. And even that back and forth there I find to be fairly interesting, because it's in a way her accepting that, like, okay, like, even if the Earth Empire's gone, we still accomplished something, and we are kind of responsible for what's happening right now in a way. And that's always something we'll have. And her saying, our great experiment has come to an end is in a way her kind of acknowledging that, like, you know, it wasn't meant to last because of kind of how far we went. And I suppose through Guan, she's potentially seeing her as she was, in terms of, like, the craziness of, like, the spirit Vine experiments, the re-education camps. She's seeing that now, I suppose, with what Guan is doing. But anyway, Guan goes on, there's so much more progress to be made, and why should others get to reap the rewards of everything the Earth Empire accomplished? I'm sure there's part of you that wishes you hadn't stood down, that wants to see how far we can take things. Kuvira says, I've seen what lies at the end of that path, death and destruction, which I think is a very interesting line, because it's like, is she talking about the Spirit Vine weapon and Korra saving her from it and, like, being in the spirit world for that little bit? Or what? Is this referring to something else, like in the past, that's happened? I'm not sure, but I think it is the fact that Korra talks about her as being broken from what happened with the Spirit Vine weapon, and that realizing that she went too far. That's why she was referring to it as, like, a great experiment, and that going too far is a problem. She realizes that now, potentially. She says, I stand by my decision, Commander, and it doesn't change the fact that the Earth Empire was defeated. You have no real power. Your force is a fraction of what the Earth Empire once was. You've offered these men and women false hope that the Earth Empire has a future. It doesn't. And they obviously get into an argument. She then gets very frustrated and says, you know, if I beat, she challenges him to a one-on-one fight, and then you will order your troops to surrender immediately. He doesn't go for this and calls her a spineless coward, and then she just attacks him. Now, what stops this attack from happening is actually Asami. Asami had previously given Kuvira these clothes, including a belt, and it's revealed that that belt was actually an electric kind of shock belt. So this is what takes out Kuvira from, you know, I suppose, you know, getting things too kind of heated up out here with the fighting. So they take her away. They end up putting her in the sort of metal prison, as you can see down there, so she can't bend anymore. But she's not really, like, angry or anything like that. She just accepts that what she did was, you know, she went a bit over the top. This is where they reveal to her that he's planning to take over politically, and she's more or less the one who comes up with the idea. We need someone popular enough to win. And that leads to the suggestion of Toph. And that's really the end of Kuvira in part 1. Obviously, there's going to be much more to come with her in terms of helping figure this all out. Like I said, I think her interaction with Toph is going to be very interesting. Whatever brings Su Yin back into the story on this side of things, I assume they'll probably use Su to try and get Toph invested, which will lead to a lot of interesting interactions. One interaction that wasn't really mentioned, one character who's not mentioned over the course of this book, is actually Batard Jr. He's mentioned by Su Yin in terms of, like, you nearly killed my son, but Kuvira gives no reaction to it. And given that she was in a relationship with him, again, we don't really know from her side of things how she felt about that relationship, in terms of, I think you could take it either way, that she wasn't really invested or that she was very invested, but she put her, you know, plans ahead of him. I'd like to see the return to that in any way, if it's at all possible, and see what's going on. But obviously they've left a lot of that to happen coming forward with the more Su Yin interaction. I suppose, like Opal and all those other characters as well, like you probably are going to get those type of interactions coming out as well. But I think it just leaves her in a very interesting position where you can see here she's trying, like she's willing to like in a way risk the position that she's in right now of having a sense of like freedom helping out here by fighting Guan to end this. So I don't get the great sense that there is any sort of a plan from her here beyond just, in a way, trying to redeem, kind of trying to accept that responsibility, but something has to happen along the way that I suppose makes her properly accept everything that she's done. And it might be addressing her past. I think it might be a more emotional moment with Su Yin where they talk about what happened, because it's always been a weird thing with Book 4. How that dynamic went from being Kuvira is captain of the guard to apparently one argument about, should you take over the Earth Kingdom, and that's the turning point for her, full stop. I find that to be very, very interesting, especially again with what the Korra said about like Kuvira was just like basically like you didn't want anyone to ever have to be like you were, like an orphan. Yet this book is borderline saying that it was more on Kuvira's side of things than anything her parents did necessarily. Again, there's not full context isn't given for that scene. We don't know if Kuvira did the whole vase thing in the past or not. But either way, I think they're trying to get across the idea that she was, at the very least, a troublesome child who was probably causing a lot of trouble the entire time. In that, like, you either say, like, her parents who get, like, 2 lines of dialogue are just, terrible and super strict, or Kuvira was rebellious, and I think you kind of lean more towards the Kuvira was rebellious side of things. Final thing to talk about here is, I suppose, Team Avatar's reaction to Kuvira, because in the preview for this book, that is the part of the setup. It says, at the back here, but when Korra and Team Avatar don't all see eye to eye as the solution, it's time for a risky road trip. So the solution obviously is Korra suggesting Kuvira. That's what really brings the conflict into things, and as you'd expect, the dynamic is I think what you expect completely. It is Korra is the one who I suppose understands Kuvira the most and is so the most willing to give her a chance. Asami, you would definitely say, is the most anti-Kuvira, but it's not as, I suppose, like aggressively anti-Kuvira as you'd expect. Asami more takes the approach of, I didn't go to the trial because I didn't want to see her because of what she did. And then when Korra suggests that, like, I need to go see Kuvira, Asami's not angry that Korra is going to see Kuvira. It's just like, I don't want to go see her as well, because Korra says, I think we should go to see her, but Asami's like, no, I don't want any part of this, I'm staying out. But she doesn't really say anything about, like, Korra shouldn't do this. I suppose she understands why Kuvira would be important here, but that's about it. Then when Korra comes back and realizes that she actually has to suggest this is where I suppose you get a little bit of an outburst from Asami. She says, I told you I didn't want to be in the same room as her. Now you expect us to welcome her to the team? And Korra explains that, like, it's not bringing her as part of the team, it's just bringing her along with us to prevent an all-out battle. And she says here, she was our enemy, she killed my father. And this is where you get, I suppose, all of the characters' kind of issues with her at this point. Kuvira's the worst. She threatened my life more than once. Mako says, I almost lost my arm taking out her Mecha Giant's engine. Zhu Li says, she nearly destroyed Republic City. Wu says, she ruined my coronation. So they all have, like, a reason to dislike Kuvira. Korra, interestingly, beyond, I think, just her saying, I know Kuvira hurt us all terribly, doesn't necessarily give a personal reason to her about that, but the others do. But once Korra says her piece, which I read out already, about, like, she helped me, like, the reason I'm willing to give her a chance is because she saved my father in the past, and anyone who is willing to do that, to me, they're not all bad, because she used to be our ally and she's changed, but she's broken now and wants to redeem herself. They all sort of get behind that, and even if they don't agree with, like, dealing with Kuvira, they're all kind of like, we'll support Korra in this, and that's what kind of prompts the situation later on where Kuvira sort of notes that, like, it's great that you're also loyal to Korra. I've never had that in my life. And it's because they see that, you know, they're supporting Korra in her decision to bring Kuvira along with them, even though they clearly don't agree with them. And that when Kuvira walks into the room, you can see here, you know, this is the first time the others are seeing her. They're immediately like, ooh, this isn't great. Even Pabu has that sort of reaction, and especially Asami. And Asami, of course, has all this stuff prepared. She's the one who brought the metal cage. She's the one who gives her this kind of shock belt without telling her later on. She's like, fine, but I'm not taking my eyes off her. But then even when she has to sort of interact with Kuvira, when she gives her the clothes, she holds back in a way. Like, Kuvira actually is the one to start up the conversation. She says, it must be challenging for you being the Avatar's girlfriend. Excuse me? Don't get too comfortable. You'll be back in the shackles soon enough. And she says, Kuvira says, well, you could be back in Republic City running your business or inventing another awesome piece of machinery. Instead, you're stuck here in a bathroom guarding me. And Asami says, I'm exactly where I want to be, protecting Korra from you. So whatever little game you're playing, it's not going to work. You're not going to drive a wedge between me and Korra. And that's when she says the line about how she knows how loyal that they all are. And she's willing to argue with them as well. But I think that the issue that they all may have is just like, in a way, like the lack of apology or outwardly feeling overly remorseful for what she's done. She still is maintaining, I think, a confidence around the group that is very undeserving from their perspective. Which I find to be fairly interesting, in that they're all very uncomfortable around her because they fought her so heavily in book 4, but she's acting more or less like that none of that happened. She doesn't feel tense around them, and I think that's what is, in a way, is kind of part of the problem. She's not overly like leading with apologies, like especially with Asami and the whole, you know, she killed Hiroshi. No real dialogue from her about that, and I think you're waiting for that moment when Kuvira almost breaks down a little bit and just says, "I am sorry for what I did to you all," and especially Asami. I think that's what is needed if they're to be on the same page. So ultimately, like the whole idea of like Korra and Team Avatar don't all see eye to eye, it's resolved within a handful of pages. It's just they all have their reasons to not like Kuvira and not want to be around her. But Kuvira is important to be involved in this situation, and we'll see exactly how that develops. Right now, they're not doing any sort of a thing where people are so frustrated that they're leaving the team because Kuvira is here. I think Asami was maybe the one you maybe would expect them to do that with, but even she's sticking around because she wants to protect Korra. Because I suppose, as from Asami's perspective, she probably understands that Korra has a sort of connection with Kuvira, so she's not as on guard around Kuvira as the others, so Asami is being that like double guard to kind of protect Korra. Briefly on the Korra-Asami moments, you get a brief moment just before Korra goes to see Kuvira, where you get Asami giving Korra, you know, a kiss on the cheek here, showing that, you know, she's not angry at Korra for wanting to see Kuvira. You get the scene of them kind of, you know, sitting next to each other in the kind of hot spring, the sauna thing. But, you know, beyond that's really about it. You know, Asami saying she wants to protect Korra, which I think is at least, you know, adding a little bit to their dynamic. I still don't feel like the book is doing anything particularly great with Asami, but at least Asami's interaction with Kuvira is something different that they can now play on. Again, I still think I'm waiting for them to do something with Asami that isn't just about her father. And I get the death of her father is going to be an important thing for a long time, but I'm still waiting for them to do something that's just Asami on her own, or Asami with another character than just her father. So, yeah, I'm very impressed with this. That's why this review has been so, you know, kind of long, because there is a lot to talk about with this one, because of Kuvira, but also because everything that happens in the Korra comics going forward is new. The stuff that's happening in the Avatar comics, not all of it is new. A lot of it is just getting towards the start of Korra, which can make a lot of it feel like it's just, you get to the show, come on, we know where this is heading, get to the big moments. Here, every kind of little thing is different and unique along the way. So even the political side of things with the Earth Kingdom politics is actually interesting to see what direction they're going to take with, like, potentially Toph up for running. We'll see what happens with Sue and this sort of thing. And, you know, how wide are they going to go on this? Are we going to see the results in all the different Earth Kingdom states or not? but I'm very, very interested going into part 2 and 3. I think this has the potential to be the Search of Korra comics. The Search obviously did, I think, a little bit more with Ursa in part 1 than this is doing with Kuvira in part 1, but there's so much potential. I think we're going to get the backstory we want, and I'm really excited to get that. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.